It's been a fun world, having left being a dentist, so to speak, a practicing dentist, to being a dentist in the world of sport. It's been a fantastic career.
Welcome back to the Sports Dentistry Podcast. And it looks like you were feeling left out, Umar. You've took yourself off to Tenerife. You must have had a bit of FOMO when I was there.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't let you have all the fun. So the podcast must be doing really well. The fact that now I've managed to get out here to test the sun out. We're still waiting for our sun cream sponsors. The first time, potentially, when we do an in-person pod, it could well be in Tenerife. We have a sun cream sponsor, and we've both been out here, so we know what it's like. So I had to experience it for myself as well. I couldn't just let you have all the fun.
Yeah, it's good. It's a nice spot. And what's the weather like? Is it warm? It'll definitely be warm for me. Like,
I think anything over 5 degrees for you is warm, mate. So I don't. Obviously, being out here in the off the coast of Africa probably doesn't go well with you. But yeah, yesterday was cloudy. There was a wee bit of sunshine. This morning was a bit cloudy, but now the sun is out, and I'm sitting inside doing this podcast with you when I could be sitting outside catching some rays and getting some vitamin D.
Yeah, I'm just saving you from reducing your risk of sun cancer, mate. I'm just looking out for you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, mate. You're a good guy. You're a good guy.
So we just finished the last podcast we did was chatting to Thanos. It was really interesting to hear his story and his experiences and how he set up the European Association for Sports Dentistry. And there is really a massive buzz around Dusseldorf. Every sports dentist I speak to are planning to go to Dusseldorf. And it looks like it's going to be a really great opportunity, an end of the year weekend, just to catch up with everything that's going on in the world of sports dentistry.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a great group of people there. I think a lot of people that we've spoken to are saying they are going there. So it's going to be fantastic just to hear about everybody else's experiences, and the program looks really, really good. There's lots of different speakers on there, so there's a bit for everybody. And Thanos was saying there's actually been quite a lot of sales since the last podcast for the EA4SD. So no problem, Thanos. You did say we can do the podcast there live. So we're in the process of trying to organise how that's going to happen. But hopefully there'll be even more people buying tickets for that. But not just for the EA4SD, but also for our UK Sports Dentistry Conference on Friday the 12th of September. John, do you want to let the listeners know a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we're live. The tickets are live. Well, firstly, you've put us under a bit of pressure now for Dusseldorf, so I think we're going to have to put our heads together and put something together that's going to be really unique and worth a visit. So if anybody is thinking what would be a good guest or a good format, as I've said before, we're pretty novices at this podcasting, and especially live podcast. It's really going to be a challenge. But it'll be good. So if anybody has any suggestions of what they would like us to do, more than welcome. Fire them at us, and we'll see if we can put together a good show. So the UK Sports Dentistry one, the tickets are live. The website looks pretty good. It's a really nice website development, and it's a pretty slick website. So obviously we're going to take all the credit, even though we did none of the hard work in the background.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be excellent, and we'll have the links for both the EA4SD and for the UK Sports Dentistry in the description as well, so people won't miss out on that. So we'll definitely be opportunity to buy the tickets, and forward to meeting a lot of the listeners there, hopefully, and getting their points across. So anything that you'd like to bring up or like us to talk about, just let us know, and we'll definitely get onto the pod.
Great. So we'll also maybe speak a wee bit about the great research that was released last week, and it got a lot of attention. Was brilliant to bring eyes on sports dentistry, and that was the research released of the survey that was done, the oral screening that was done of the academy players in soccer clubs in the UK, with my colleagues in UCL, and they showed us that there's still a massive need for raising awareness of the importance of sports dentistry. It supports all the research that has been done previously, which is good to show that sort of consistency, but it's a little bit disappointing in the fact that some of the research that was done a decade or so ago, that action hasn't really been taken. And we're still in this position where there is a real need for building that awareness for the importance of sports dentistry.
Yeah, we need publications and articles like this to raise awareness. I've had a few sports medical colleagues message me and saying they've actually read it in the BMJ and they're like, wow, I actually didn't realize the extent of it. So we need to create awareness and put it out in the open. This is where we need to start. We can't just go straight into the elite because by that point, you're too deep by that point. So you have to start at the academy, underage, with education and prevention. We talked about this before, how, well, certainly Scottish Rugby have got a new contract with Coca-Cola Company. There's going to be a lot of Powerade on site and a lot of the players will be drinking all that. I've got no issue with that at all. I've got no issue with them drinking Powerade or isotonic drinks in general. It's just about the education part of it, when they should be having it, how much of it they should be having. So it's not about not having these isotonic drinks, but it's about educating them in what's the best going to help them in terms of not just their oral health, but ultimately their performance too. And that also then leads on to what the publication's about in terms of oral health and dental caries and erosion and periodontal disease. So all comes together, doesn't it? There's always a common denominator there.
Yeah, and I had a really interesting conversation over the last week with a sports nutritionist who's going to be presenting in Manchester. And he was saying he works a lot with the sort of elite cyclists. And he's doing a good bit of work with the Premier League clubs as well. But he would work a lot with elite cyclists, and that they would recommend over a 6-hour cycle that the cyclist would have an intake of carbohydrates every 20 minutes, whether that's a gel or a drink. But that's what they're sort of recommending from a sports performance point of view. He says he never really thought about it from what sort of impact that would have with their oral health. So it's really important having these conversations with our colleagues, our sports medicine colleagues, and the support team for the athletes to try to have that conversation and look at ways, as you say, it's not necessarily trying to get them to change their diet that they have for their sports performance, but looking at ways that we can sort of reduce the risk to their oral health from that diet that they're on.
Yeah, ultimately it all comes down to reducing the risk, doesn't it? We don't want to interfere with what the nutritionist is saying or the dietitian is saying, because they are trying to get the ultimate or peak performance out of the athlete. So we need to then give advice in terms of how is this going to help prevent any future oral health problems, but also coinciding with them being able to perform to their best ability, and for them to win or compete or just get that 1% better. We have to make sure we can't get involved and stop that from happening. But also at the same time, we need to be able to prevent the preventables, putting it bluntly.
Yep. Yeah. It's about working together and creating that awareness. I do think if we start going in and we try to tell them how to change their diet for their oral health, I think we're going to find it very hard for them to get buy-in, because they're going to start maybe thinking, I'll not want to get involved with these guys that are trying to change my diet because my diet's set for performance. So it's really trying to work together in a team approach and trying to come at it so we can try to find the best way which doesn't impact their preparation and how they perform. Yeah, so we had our next guest, so I'm looking forward to the guest that we have on today. Now, we had planned to get Serpil on from Dental Trauma UK, but Umar's high-flying lifestyle meant logistically it was a little bit difficult to get her on for this week, so we've planned Serpil for an episode down the line. But this guest this week's really interesting. We talk about prevention there when it comes to screening, and this is also a type of prevention where this next guest is very much focused on the prevention of oral trauma with his Mouthguard brand.
It's funny you're blaming me for it, but you know what? I'll take one for the team because there's no I in team, and I will take one for the team. It's all good. But yeah, I'm really excited to hear what this next guest has to offer. And yeah, here's a little introduction about him.
Just before that, there's no I in team, but there is a me in team. So I think that's just to highlight that for you everywhere.
Very good, mate. Very good. Thanks very much for highlighting that.
So I'm really looking forward to hearing the guest of this podcast. A little bit different. We've got a dentist that's heavily involved in sports, but he's more to the manufacturing side of things, that he's developed a really impressive mouthguard company, and it's worldwide known, and that is Dr. Anthony Lovat of OPRO.
Yeah, OPRO's a massive brand, isn't it? And everywhere you go in the shops, you can see their mouth guards there, the kind of inverted commas boil and bite, or how he likes to call them, the custom fit or the instant custom fit ones. Hats off to him. This business he's created is worldwide and it's been used by athletes that we see on the TV every week, it feels like. And obviously the connection they have now with Prevent.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and particularly the way they've been able to help World Rugby roll out instrumented mouthguards worldwide from the start of last year. It's really a phenomenal process he has for creating the mouthguards. And I was fortunate to have a visit of the OPRO lab back when I was helping with the Gaelic Players Association set up their mouthguard procurement program back in 2013. And it was really an impressive setup that he had. It looked almost like a car assembly line more than like a dental lab. So what he was able to create was really interesting, and I'm really looking forward to him explaining this journey and describing how things have changed over the years. Particularly back then, it was still very much analog. We're still very much altitude impressions, where now everything's moved towards the digital. So it's going to be really interesting to hear his story.
Yeah, I'd love to know just how they're able to manufacture the sheer volume of mouthguards that they do most likely on a daily basis. It'd be quite good to understand the mechanics behind it and how he's able to keep the consistency in terms of the quality that they're able to produce.
Yeah, it's great. I'm also looking to find out where the name OPRO come from, so that'll be interesting as well. So let's get rocking and rolling. Let's head to our next guest.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Hey everyone, save the date. The UK Sports Dentistry Association's second conference is happening on Friday the 12th of September at the Voco Hotel in Manchester. And guess what? It's not just about teeth. We're combining cutting-edge sports dentistry talks with the thrill of live sport. Right after the conference, we're heading to Emirates Old Trafford for the England versus South Africa T20 International. Expect a day packed with expert speakers, athlete Q&A sessions, and plenty of time for networking with dentists, sports pros, and athletes alike. Whether you're in dentistry or passionate about sport, this is a day you won't want to miss. Tickets are live now at sportsdentistryuk.com. Grab yours and join us for an unforgettable day. So I'm delighted to welcome the guest for this pod, Dr. Anthony Lovat, who would be more famous for setting up OPRO. Thanks very much for coming on to join us in the pod today, Anthony.
My pleasure. Lovely to be here.
So really what we're doing with the podcast is we're trying to get interesting stories for people that are involved in sports dentistry, and you have a really unique story yourself. So can you give us a little bit of a background to how you got into dentistry and then how you developed from clinical dentistry into manufacturing mouthguards?
Yeah, sure. Well, I grew up in a dental household. My late father and mother were both dentists. So I grew up with conversations over the dinner table all being about dentistry. So it just seemed a natural thing to me to do. When I got to leave school, I went to dental college, UCH, qualified as a dentist in 1981, and went from there straight into practice. And I was involved with a number of practices and took some interest in the latter stages of my clinical years in implants and what have you. I was seeing a number of kids from local schools who came in with dental injuries from sport. And it just got me thinking a little bit about what I could do to prevent the problem rather than fix the problem. So back in about 1996, and I'd qualified in 81, back in 96, I wrote to 100 schools in the sort of the local area saying that I'd like to come in and take some impressions and make some mouth guards, see if I could start up a sort of a business in that way. After 3 months, I'd had no replies. And then suddenly out of the blue, I got a phone call from Harrow School and a chap called Roger Utley, who at that point in time was a head of rugby there, but also a very famous ex-England British Lions player, and was also England manager at one point. And he said to go down to the school and see how many boys wanted to have mouth guards. So I created some little forms, sent them out to the school, turned up to take some impressions one day. Blow me down, 150 boys turned up to have impressions taken for mouthguards. So I thought, there's some possibilities here. I've only had one response out of the 100, but I said to Roger, could you help at all? And Roger happened to be the president of an independent schools PE conference and said, well, why don't you come and speak at a PE conference? So I said, great, I'll turn up. So I turned up at this PE conference, was asked to talk, and was sitting in a lunch hall, and everyone was having lunch, and I was speaking over lunch about how important mouth guards are and what to do if you have your teeth knocked out and all sorts of things. And no one was paying any real interest to what I was saying until I happened to say, well, if any of your children got a tooth damaged or knocked out, could you be liable as their teacher if they weren't wearing a mouth guard? And suddenly the whole place just went quiet. And I carried on talking about in loco parentis, the responsibilities in law that teachers have for children. And the interest was palpable. And at the end of that lunch, pretty much every single school came up and said, can we use your services? And that's when OPRO was born. So that was in 96. So I actually sold up my dental practice and thought, I'm just going to give this a go, see what happens, and started OPRO in 1997. And in the first year, we had about 300 schools sign up, and it was all ahead after that.
So, yeah, I'd be interested to know, did you ever know why Roger replied he was the only one to reply? Was it his background in sport, or was there like an incident that maybe happened in the school that he thought maybe we should use his service? Was there ever any inkling to why he replied when nobody else did?
That's a really good question. Actually, I don't know the answer. He was a forward-thinking chap, and something caught his imagination, and it all took off from there.
I'm sure back in 96, it was a little bit of a different landscape when it comes to actually making the mouth guards and taking the impressions. What was that sort of setup like? So were you outsourcing the mouth guards at that time? Were you going in, taking the impressions and outsourcing them? Or were you making them yourself? Or how did that develop at that stage?
It's a very good question. So the first year I found an outsourced laboratory, and I went to them and said, look, this year I'm hoping I'll make 10,000, 20,000 custom mouth guards. And they laughed a little bit at me, but they said, yeah, we can do it. What happened that first year was virtually the end of the business before it started, because the laboratory that we signed up with simply wasn't capable of coping with the volumes we had. And the turnaround time was awful. The quality was indifferent. And at the end of that first season, I realized that if there was going to be any future, I actually had to take control of the manufacturing myself. So the second year, we started with our own laboratory. And that was interesting because unlike most labs, I had to go from nothing to making somewhere in excess of 1,000 mouth guards a day. So I had to look at the whole way that mouth guards were made and dissect it all and try and break it down into little bits that I could get, particularly the youngsters who were in their sort of holidays from university, to come and work for me in the September because they weren't at university. And I couldn't teach anyone how to make a whole mouth guard because that's just too complicated. But what I could do was teach an individual how to do a little bit of a mouth guard. So I could teach someone how to cast an impression. I could teach someone how to block out gaps amongst teeth or how to block out around dental braces. I could teach someone how to trim a mouth guard, but without teaching them everything beforehand. So I broke the whole mouth guard production down into 10, 15 small steps, and then got people involved in the lab on a temporary basis who could learn just one part of making a mouth guard and become good at that. And I just bolted it all together. And sure enough, in that was the second year of OPRO, we got through 1,000 mouth guards a day, and the turnaround time was good and the quality was pretty decent. And then things moved on from there because I realized the volumes were going to have to be higher. The numbers of schools in the years 2 and 3 went up. And so I started on a journey of creating ways of making things happen more easily, how to cast something more quickly, more easily in volume. If you're doing if you're doing a few hundred impressions per hour, how can you do that? So I came up with little ways of, in fact, we designed our own impression trays, and our impression trays went into a little block we could pour plaster into. So we didn't have to worry about the normal way of manually trimming a model. This is back in the day. So yeah, the next few years was about growing the business, growing the number of schools, but also improving how we actually went about manufacturing the mouthguards.
So that's almost like a conveyor belt that you've discussed there, having somebody at a certain station doing that to make it more efficient and cost effective, I suppose. Can you just talk us through that initial period then? You've just touched on it there. So when you received the impression, can you just talk us through back then what you would do and how you would make those mouth guards? Was it pressure laminated? Was it vacuum formed? We'd just like to hear a little bit about the initial phase.
Sure. So from the very beginning, everything I did, I looked to try and do the best way possible. Now, I, at that point in time, believed, as is still the case, that pressure forming is better than vacuum forming, for example, particularly when you want to laminate a mouthguard, because you can't vacuum form successfully through laminates. And as years have progressed, that's proven to be the right way of doing things, because nowadays we're making many multi-layer mouthguards with, for example, electronics between layers and what have you. So right at day one, I invested in pressure forming machines, which we've still got to this day, although they're heavily modified now. They're all fully automated. And we started just with cast impressions, regular, what was in those days, Cathode dental plaster. I don't know if it exists nowadays still. We've all moved on to 3D scanning and printing and what have you. But it was pressure forming multiple layers of mouthguards right from day one.
And so how did you get the knowledge to be able to make a mouthguard? I know, like, qualified in 2006 and you only used like a vacuum former in university, and it wasn't until I did the course at UCL that I started to understand a bit more about the thermoforming and laminating and multi-layers. But back in 1996, I'm sure there was less availability of getting the knowledge to understand the best way to create a mouthguard. How were you able to go out and get that, or is it just trial and error? Or
it was again an interesting time. I met with a number of dental technicians that I used and went to see them and see how they made their mouth guards, and they all did things slightly differently. And then ultimately, I just tried to take everything that I'd learned and rewrite it all for ourselves, because making 1,000 mouth guards is different to making one. So basically, as I said, having understood the process of how a mouth guard is made, where you have a model, you cast the impression rather to make a model. You've then got to block out any areas that could interfere with the fitting of the mouth guard, be it, for example, if there's an unerupted tooth, you want to block that out to allow the tooth to come through into the mouth guard without the mouth guard becoming too tight. If there's orthodontics going on, again, you want to block out around the orthodontics to try and allow for some tooth movement. Then we went through making one layer, typically using a 4mm to start off with, adding then the player's name, etc., the school details and all the rest of it, a further clear laminate over the top. In the early days, it was hand shaping the mouth guard. We've now moved on from that to using CAD systems that I've developed myself to actually generate cutting paths for robots to cut out the shape of the mouth guard. But basically, I went and learnt how things were done back in the mid-90s, and then to a degree tore that all up and started again building on what I'd learned, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's great. And just actually, this is a question that I'm not sure if I've asked you before, but were you always called OPRO, or where did the name OPRO come from?
Yeah, well, when I started up Harrow, I thought I better have a name, and what are we doing? Oral protection. So I took the O from oral and the pro from protection, popped them together, and that was it. And that probably took 5 minutes to come up with that name, and that's it. That's just the name.
I would never have guessed that. I always wondered where OPRO came from.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
oral protection.
Yeah, very good.
I've always wondered that as well, actually. So thanks for the explanation. What would you say that the biggest challenges were then, or have been?
I think there have been different biggest challenges at different stages in developing the business. And, been going 25 plus years now. The first 10 years of OPRO was all about custom mouthguards only. It was all about a school service only, and just making that more efficient. We were at one point doing 50, 60, 70,000 mouthguards a year. We were manufacturing in the lab in September upwards of 3 to 3,500 a day. And we had various challenges, obviously keeping the schools satisfied. There's the incredible ergonomics of sending out 80, 90, 100 different dental teams to different schools every day was dramatically complicated challenge, which that was solved by involving the mathematics department at Warwick University and one of their MSc students doing a kind of a piece of work for me, where he created a mathematical modeling piece of software where we could just pump in all the names of all the dentists with their addresses, pop in all the school names and times of the visits, and the software would calculate the best methods of putting those all together so we could actually service all the visits every day. So it was looking at each of the problems that we faced and trying to find the best solution. And during those first 10 years, we went from manually shaping a mouth guard to using like 3D milling machines, which I converted into sort of 5-axis, quite rudimentary, but they work well to cut out the basic shape of a mouth guard from data which I took from the surface of the mouth using digital pens. This is all software that I wrote. My son happened to be a maths student at Warwick at that time. He didn't do the other project for me, but we looked into doing 3-dimensional modeling back in the sort of late 90s, early 2000s. And I created some milling machines that could shape the mouth guard. So it allowed us to increase the volumes. And those are the two primary challenges: keeping the schools happy and the logistics around the schools and dentists and what have you. And then the other side of it was just increasing our quality, increasing the turnaround pace and so on. And that was the first 10 years of OPRO through till about 2007. And then things changed in 2007 for a number of reasons.
So you're going to elaborate? What happened in 2007?
Yep. I thought you might ask me that. So in 2007, there was a little juncture of a few things colliding all at the same time. One of which is that we won the Queen's Award for Innovation, which was great from a point of view of acknowledging what we'd managed to achieve. So that was lovely and was good PR from our point of view. I also was starting to think more in 2007 about how I could make mouth guards on a retail basis rather than just direct from dentists. And it struck me at the time when I started looking into it that the one thing I had to do is encapsulate in a document what, in my mind, made a successful mouth guard, and use that document as a basis for trying to create a retail product which could, as best as possible, emulate it. And so I started looking into this whole area of mouth guards and selling mouth guards, and came across the fact that mouth guards had to be CE certified. Now, we've all heard about CE certification, but back in those days, all the mouth guards in the UK that I saw sold had letters CE on them, but none of them actually comply with any regulations. And I don't want to bore you with technical stuff, but there has to be a standard for for a mouth guard to be certified. And there was no standard for mouth guards back in 2007. So I set about writing one for ourselves, an internal standard, and which then we set out the dimensions of mouth guards, the amount of energy it had to absorb, and all sorts of things. This is for us to develop then a retail product. But as an aside, having written that standard, I was approached by members of a committee that had been set up just then on a European level and a British level as well, to try and create a unified standard. So the standard that I wrote for OPRO, just for us, became a draft standard for Europe. and things started moving in various ways, I started creating a retail product where the mouthguards, the retail mouthguards we made, passed our standards. So it's not a European, but our standards at that point. So I felt happy to put those mouthguards in the marketplace. And really the next phase of OPRO was really just pushing the standard side of things, trying to create some sort of standard that mouthguards had to aspire to be, and then making a retail range of products that would pass those standards so that they could then be properly CE certified. We started up a retail operation from zero in 2007, which grew pretty dramatically over the next few years based upon everything I've just talked about. So that was effectively phase 2 of OPRO.
So if we go a little bit into the sort of standards you were looking at. So first of all, if anybody has any complaints about the current standard in Europe of mouthguards, please send them to Anthony, because he made up the standards. No, I'm joking. But when you were looking at standards, what were the types of things you were looking at? Were you looking at the amount of energy they absorb? Obviously, when you're talking about retail, we're talking about boil and bites, what would be traditionally known as a boil and bite mouthguard. So again, a lot of sort of negative side that people see at boil and bites is the fit, but you can't really, if you're making it, the fit doesn't come in till after. So what were the standards? Was the fit taken in, or was it the thickness of the material, the type of the material, how much was absorbed if there was contact? Talk us through them types of things that you were looking into when you were setting the standards.
Sure. So there were lots of conversations that took place with people far cleverer than me about what was required for a standard, etc. What we came to the table with was sort of 10 years of making custom mouth guards a certain way. So having made best part of 500,000 custom mouth guards with an experience of virtually no dental injuries that we were aware of. So we had what we thought was a good design and makeup of mouth guard. And it was agreed by, as I said, people, professors and all the rest of it, that was a good starting point, that if the standard replicated what we were making, there would be a reasonable chance that would be successful in the marketplace. So the particular things we looked at were the dimensions of the mouth guard to make sure it covers the areas it's supposed to cover. So, for example, the mouth guard should always go back as far as the distal margin of the first upper molar, plus or minus X number of millimeters. We didn't want mouth guards finishing on the premolars, for example, that they should cover all the teeth, that they should cover a certain amount of the gingivae, both buccally and palatally. So one of the aspects was the dimensions, both in coverage, but then also in thickness. In those days, we really only had one material we were using. So the logic was, well, the thicker it is, the better it is. And we set certain dimensional limits. We don't want it thinner than X, and we don't want it thicker than Y, because if it's thicker than Y, it'll start sticking out in your mouth and it'll be uncomfortable. So it's kind of creating an envelope of comfort of a mouth guard. It was then looking at the force transmission through the material being used. And what I did was look at the force transmission through 1 millimeter, through 2 millimeters, 3, 4, 5, and so on, creating a graph of the amount of force being transmitted on that material versus its thickness, then applying that to the actual thickness of the mouth guard in the critical parts, so we actually could see how much force would be absorbed in different parts of the mouth guard. And again, we had data from our custom mouth guards, so we were looking to generate a retail product which, after fitting, would give similar force reduction. And the final part, or the core parts, was retention. So ultimately, we devised a test, a mouth guard having been fitted, whether it was a custom or whether it was a boil and bite, we would apply a force to lift the mouth guard off the model. And again, by using a strain gauge, we were able to say if something was retentive enough. It was all quite crude at the beginning, but it was a first step into creating something that could be used.
Just going on to custom mouthguards initially, what would you say is the gold standard? So for the people listening here, clinicians, dentists, anybody else who's interested in this, what would you say that the gold standard would be for a custom fitted mouthguards with relation to sport? So if you've got rugby, is it different to ice hockey? Is it different to hockey, field hockey? Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, my experience is that, well, a few things. I don't think there's anything as such a gold standard. I think, well, there is, but it's within a kind of a range, you know, different. And my experience now, having been involved with so many, both children wearing mouth guards, all the way up to professional and World Cup winners and what have you wearing mouth guards, is the gold standard is what the player likes. That's first of all very important. It's no good if the player doesn't like it. Obviously, it's got to be sufficiently energy absorbing. So it's got to be a mix of a number of things, which makes it very hard to say it's got to be this. So some players will like their mouth guards to be 2-3 millimeters thick. Some will like them 3-4 millimeters thick. The 3-4 is probably going to give more energy absorption than the 2-3, unless the material is different. And what's become clear over time is that different material, EVAs is what's normally used for mouth guards, but there are different grades of EVA which have got different amounts of energy absorption. And so it's very much a mix of everything. Now, we know, because we spend a lot of time on it, what we put together. We know the energy absorption of our EVAs, and we use more than one in different cases. So when we bolt it all together, we know what comes out is going to be our gold standard, if you like. And we know, because we've now made millions and millions of them, that we get great success with those. But if for a regular dentist who may want to make one in their own practice, the answer is that technically you need to have it certified via a test to make sure it passes a standard. And again, I don't want to this is quite a complicated world still, but dentists on their own shouldn't actually make their own mouth guards unless they actually have them independently tested and verified before they actually give them to a patient.
It's a very time-consuming thing. You're making mouth guards. We've been on the courses of the master's program and we've made it from start to finish. You need to know what you're doing. You need to be highly skilled as well. It's not just as simple as taking the impression or a scan and using the pressure limiter. There's so much that goes into it. So I certainly agree that the only reason I use gold standard is just because a lot of people do relate to that in terms of what minimum inverted commas thickness that a mouth guard should be. And I agree with you that a lot of players like it a different way in terms of different size, how far back it goes as well. So yeah, I completely agree with you on all those aspects.
I think the thing to point out is that mouth guards are PPE, they're personal protective equipment, and they come under the personal protective equipment guidelines and what have you. And for anyone to provide the mouth guard nowadays to a player, as it's PPE, it has to have been certified as a conforming. So hopefully all the laboratories who make mouth guards have actually gone through the course of sending their materials and their mouth guards to a notified body to make sure that they are actually, that they comply, so to speak. Little word, if a dentist makes a mouth guard and just gives it to a player, technically, unless they've had them certified, that there could be a problem there. So it's not something that should actually be done. So yeah.
I'll just touch back on just when you're talking about dimensions and stuff, because I had the pleasure, as you know, of seeing your setup now. It's a little while ago, so I'm sure things have changed. It was back in start of 2013, I think. And what really impressed me was some of the things that you had introduced, and used the feedback from them. So as you're talking about the digital pens, where you would have used the digital pens around the study model, and then you were explaining to me at the time how you were able to use all that data from all them models that went through the lab to be able to design custom fitted trays to make the impression process easier. And then you were also using all that data, as you're saying, you were doing thousands a day, some days, and you're able to use that to help create the dimensions from your boiler bite. And it was something that always stuck with me, because now whenever I go into a sports shop and I see the big range of boiling bites, you can easily see how the OPRO boiling bites actually look like the curvature and the arch width of a mouth compared to some of the other brands like Shock Doctor and stuff look like a very small U. I always found that was very interesting, and people maybe didn't realise the amount of detail that was going into some of the decisions you were making.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we've got data from goodness knows how many millions of mouths. And yes, back in when we started in 2007 with the retail range, I got it into a decent shape. More recently, we just got better and better. And now I've got such good data that are, we don't call the most recent mouthguard that we've brought out, we call an instant custom rather than a boil and bite, is so closely shaped to what I'd call the average, if anything exists as an average shape of all the mouths, and also allows for the fact that we know how much flexion there's got to be in a mouth guard in different dimensions. So we're making provision in the mouth guard that it's got weaknesses, if you like, so it moves more around certain axes depending upon the shape of someone's mouth. But yeah, everything we've done has sat on the foundation of a custom mouth guards, because that was the only thing we did for the first 10 years.
And just touching on the instant custom, as you've called it, probably this, your premium boil and bite. We used them for Birmingham Commonwealth Games as a solution to provide mouth guards for athletes that needed mouth guards. So for any of the listeners out there, sometimes at the major competitions at the likes of the Olympic Games or the Commonwealth Games, part of the dental facilities that are supplied to the athletes during the games is the provision of a mouth guard. And I know back in Glasgow 2014, when we were working there, the organising committee had used like a local lab that was very close to the venue. But in Birmingham, because there was 3 different athletes' villages, it was going to be a lot bigger of a challenge, and there was 3 different dental facilities. So then this is where your solution came and worked really well, which was the instant custom fitted, which is like a boil and bite. Can you explain that product, and has that product been possible not only to all the data that you've collected in the lab, but to the evolution of maybe materials that you're using?
Yeah, so the instant custom is a combination of a few things that we've developed over time. It's made exactly the same way as a custom mouth guard. So it's made multiple layers, a player's name can go in it, etc., etc. But rather than it being based upon a model of a mouth, it's based upon a standard model, if you like, and then it's got a fitting system that comes with it. Fitting a mouth guard, a boil and bite, the problem is that there's so many variables. Different people are going to press their fingers with different amount of force. Some are going to push their tongue in the palate. Some are not going to push their tongue in the palate. And the thing that struck me always about thermoforming or pressure forming is you get a pretty even amount of pressure over the surface of the heated EVA when it compresses around the teeth. So what I tried to come up with was a mechanism where I could harness the power of the bite, because a masseter is as everyone knows, is a very powerful muscle, to actually generate compressive force. So the first, we called it a cage, a compression cage, a double layer cage you put the mouth guard into. And as you bite together, you don't use your fingers to compress the mouth guard around the gums, you just bite. And the biting force of the outer cage over the inner cage compresses it and creates an even force all over the mouth guard and forces it all over your teeth at the same time. And I found that the retention I was getting and the fit was absolutely first rate. And the instant custom, I think you use it at the Commonwealth Games, but now we're doing, well, hundreds of thousands a year now, which are going globally, because the actual end result is very, very good. And the retention can be every bit as good as a custom mouthguard made from a typical impression or a scan. And yes, along the way, we have to look at materials. Oops, excuse me a sec. Let me just turn that off. Should have put it on silent.
Yeah.
I'll just step back again. And yes, the materials that we've used for the instant custom are continually under review. They're made from 3 layers, one being the what I call the fins on the inside, which become very gel-like when they become hot. But the outer layer must be much tougher. It absorbs more energy and also doesn't mark from the cage when you bite into it. So Yeah, a lot of development work over time and just making it as good as we possibly can.
You must be incredibly proud. OPRO is such a well-known brand now, not just here in the UK, but you just said worldwide. You see it on the TV screens with a lot of international athletes. I mean, you're affiliated with making the OPRO Mouthguards for Wales, England, New Zealand rugby, wrestling, GB hockey. But now there's obviously something new in the market, which leads us on quite nicely to these instrumented mouthguards. Now, the instrumented mouthguards is a buzzword at the minute. There's a lot of focus going into these new mouthguards that the elite rugby players are mandated to wear. Can you just give us a bit of information as to how this partnership came about with Prevent and how you got involved and where you see that going?
So we've been making instrumented mouthguards back since 2013, when I think the first trials started happening with Stanford University in the States. And they contacted us because they quickly realized that they could make their electronics, but they weren't very good at making mouthguards. And so we started making mouthguards with electronics in for Stanford, as I said, from back well over 10 years ago. The Prevent is a much more recent thing. So Prevent have obviously got a fantastic set of electronics in a pretty small board with battery and what have you. And when they first went to market and World Rugby took an interest, I think it became clear to everybody that to be able to make all the mouthguards in the volume, in the quality required, it needed experts in making mouthguards. So we now make all the mouthguards and we incorporate Prevent's electronics into the mouthguards. We have no knowledge of or experience in what's in the electronics. We just get the boards from them. What our bit of a jigsaw is to make sure they go into the mouthguard in the right place. They are retentive. The mouthguards are well made, and that then is delivered onto the players. And certainly now, as you say, World Rugby, it's kind of mandated. It's not quite a mandate. What they're saying to all elite players around the world is that if they wear one of these mouthguards, they can take part in full HIA protocols. So they can be removed from play, tested, and then sent back on if they're okay. But if they're not wearing an instrumented mouthguard and there is a question mark about an impact they've had, they have to be removed from play for the rest of the game. And certainly now we're making mouthguards which are going all over the world to all countries that play rugby, which is fabulous.
Yeah, so there's two. It's brilliant, and both myself and Umar are helping out with the scanning to get them fitted. Like recently, I've just been in with the women's Irish rugby team on Wednesday to pick up a few of newcomers to the squad for the rest of the Six Nations, and like the turnaround time is quoted to be 2 days, which I think is absolutely unbelievable. So there's two questions leading on from this that'll be quite interesting. One is more the design of the mouthguard, more the tech is, and second is what's really made it possible for this to be rolled out as digital technology and the use of scanners, and then how have you evolved to take that. So I'll maybe touch on the first one initially. So I know I didn't realize the work you were doing with Stanford, and I knew you were doing quite a lot of work with ProTech at one stage, who were an instrumental mouthguard company out of Swansea University. And there was probably a little bit of design because initially some of the tech would have been lingually and stuff like that. Talk us through that sort of stage, the design stage, and where it was first tried out and how it developed to where it's placed now.
Yeah, so there have been a few companies around the world who've got involved in electronics and mouthguards. You've had, as you say, Protect SWA out of Wales. There's Prevent in America, Biocore, a company in America who've been providing stuff over there. Then I'm sure I'm going to forget someone. There's Hit IQ in Australia. And Stanford were doing their own research work. We've made mouthguards for all of these parties over the years, so we're familiar with everybody. All of them initially came from a non-dental background, obviously. They came from an electronics background, and some were easier to fit into a mouth, shall we say, than others. I mean, one of the sets of electronic boards we were faced with at one point had, as you said, a battery in the palate, which we had to work around. I always felt it was going to be a bigger challenge for the players. And certainly we spoke with the manufacturers and said, look, in your next iteration of design, we really think you want to try and get the battery out the pallet into the buckle sulcus. So there has been an evolution in the boards, in the size. The ones we're currently making with Prevent, the size is absolutely fabulous. They really are pretty small boards. They sit between approximately the distal margin of the 6, and the little aerial comes round to around about the upper 3, so that they are pretty small. They have some bulk. They have to have some bulk. So if you're watching closely on TV, you'll see the players have got a little bit of padding on the left side of their mouth, which is where the board is. But we always talk with all the various manufacturers, and I come at it from a dental perspective to say what is going to be the best shape given the constraints they've got to get it into a mouth. So the ones with Prevent now are pretty good. They do extend a little further back than a typical mouthguard might do on the side of the electronics. Typically, we like mouthguards to finish at the distal margin of the 6. Let's say the ones with the electronics may extend slightly onto the 7s, and we cut them back a bit more in the palate so they're not uncomfortable there. And I think we've got to a point now where the satisfaction levels have got pretty high. It's taken a while, but I think we've got to a good place now.
And just a quick question. Why is it always on the left? Is it just because that's just then it's easy for manufacturer, or is there a scientific reason for it, or is it just we pick one side, keep it to one side, so it's the same?
I'm going to give you a really rubbish answer, which is that Prevent say you put it on the left, and we don't say why, we just say yes. I suspect that everything is calculated around centers of mass and all sorts of things.
Okay.
I think we've taken the position that we know our expertise, and we also know we're not expert. So we'll just leave people like Prevent to tell us what they need, and we just make sure it's delivered the best possible way.
And so, like, the tack itself has got quite small then from the very first stages of instrumental mouthguards. I can presume at the version 1 Prevent, which used to wrap around the buckle, compared to version 2 now, is the difference is fantastic. So God knows what version 3 is going to be. It might be even smaller. We're talking a lot about instrumental mouthguards in terms of monitoring head acceleration and things like that. Have you made mouthguards with other tack that monitored anything else over the years? Was there any companies that said, can you put this into a mouthguard, but it wasn't to do with head acceleration? Was there any other tack companies monitoring anything else
that have actually ended up going? No, we've had a few people come to us with interesting ideas. For example, implanting caffeine tablets in the side of mouthguards. You've got a slow release of caffeine during a game. That never got anywhere, but there have been a few interesting requests, shall we say.
Can you see this rolling out commercially?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, we follow as opposed to lead when it comes to the actual instrumentation itself. Do I believe it can become a much wider commercial use? Yeah, absolutely. I think for that to happen, there has to be a level of understanding of what mouthguards can do and what they can't do from an electronic perspective. Right now, what they do is they measure impact, and they measure linear acceleration, they measure rotational acceleration. What they don't do is translate that or interpret that as you have been concussed, because this is still in the formative years, if you like, of people trying to work out if there is an algorithm that can say this sequence of events will lead to a concussion, because it's often not one impact. It's often accumulation of impacts of a certain size over a certain time. So I think we're getting to a place now where there are some thresholds that have been set by World Rugby, and clearly above those thresholds, players are assessed for HIAs, for head impact assessment. But I certainly do see this becoming much more commercial over the next few years. The important thing is for the electronics manufacturers is to make sure that what is delivered commercially has a commercial value to the teams, the parents, the children, whoever's playing. And there is some value that they're actually getting from the data, so to speak. And that's still being evaluated at the moment, I think.
So leading on then to the second question I had a little bit earlier, how you spoke earlier about how you put this whole process together to get the study model from the impressions from the early days. And we've now moved into the digital world and how you've been able to supply these mouthguards internationally because that initial period is digital. So it's not if someone halfway around the world has taken an impression and they're trying to send them to you. I know from sending STL files to yourselves that you prefer them in raw STL. So I was presuming that you've got a certain setup and you've your own sort of model and stuff done in house that works for you. So can you describe us how that transition from analog to digital and how you were to do that and where do you see that going?
Yeah. So every mouthguard, custom mouthguard we make, it starts its life as a digital file. So if we get an impression, we actually scan the impression to turn it into an STL file. If we get a scan, it obviously comes in as an STL, and we want them just raw, because the whole journey of the mouthguard starts with building the model onto which we're actually going to make the mouthguard, because by building our own model, we can make some changes to the model. As, for example, if it needs to be blocked out in certain areas, we can do that electronically. Now, we use some software called OPRO CAD. It might sound a bit OPRO-ish because it is. I actually designed it and had it written for us, and we sort of develop it over the years. And basically, not only will it create the model in the dimensions that we require and give it the right base, it'll fit into our machines so it can be moved around the machines and held. So it's got a particular base which is printed onto it. We also capture all the data for the actual circumference of the mouthguard, and that data is transferred to the robots. We've now got proper robots we use to cut the mouthguard out from the model. So basically, everything now is electronic, and we print all our models in house. And every impression or every scan we get goes through our OPRO CAD and then is converted into the model. And also all the other data we require regarding the mouth and the shape of the. So, for example, we have different profiles as well. So if we get a scan from you for a player who just plays Gaelic football, we put it through one profile, which we know it's not going to have, for example, the electronics in it. If we get another scan from you, John, and we know this one's going to be going into a player who's having electronics in their mouthguard, it develops a different profile to cut the extremity of the mouthguard out, leaving the space for where the electronics go. So the whole thing is all bolted together quite nicely.
I've got a couple of questions. First question is for not just people who are scanning, but also there'll still be people taking impressions as well, for patients that have orthodontic braces, brackets and wires, traditional ones. And then there's also a number of patients who wear aligners. So I've got athletes who I'm treating at the moment with aligners, and I'm trying to take the scan, and sometimes it doesn't pick up that well, but then you take off the auto AI and it actually picks up quite well, and then you send it to you guys, you clean it all up. But if we could just take it back to people who are listening, who are taking traditional impressions for patients who have orthodontic braces, what do you recommend they do?
So typically, I recommend, if I'm taking an impression over an orthodontic brace and assuming the wire is in place and the person taking the impression isn't going to be removing the wire, we use orthodontic wax just to block out all around the wire to make sure the alginate, when they should be using alginate, doesn't get trapped under the brace and yank on it too hard. Ultimately, it leaves a bit of a mess in the impression but what we do is block it all out around the actual wire, that whole area. And ultimately, we try and think about where the teeth are going to go. So it's not about making a mouthguard for now, it's about making a mouthguard which hopefully is going to last for a longer period. So where the mouthguard will fit pretty well around the gums, but we're actually going to create a bit of extra space around the teeth to allow for some movement. So alginate, always use wax, always use the biggest tray you possibly can get in the mouth, because you want as much alginate in front of the wax as possible so the whole alginate doesn't tear, and extend the impression as much as possible. That's what we would look for.
And then for a patient wearing a liner, obviously impression's fine because that just goes over the top. But if you were scanning that, would you say just disable AI and then you guys clean it up?
Yeah, I mean, I actually am not familiar with scanning over over a retainer. I've always assumed one would take the retainer out and scan the teeth. That because ultimately I'm assuming that the athlete's going to play without the retainer in their mouth.
Not if they're wearing aligners. You know, if they're moving their teeth with such as Invisalign or Angel Aligner or something like that. So you want them to be wearing it all the time. So the athletes that I have that are wearing them just now, I scan that with the aligner in place. But I'm just asking from your opinion, is that the right thing to be doing?
Well, it's an interesting question because because we're going to make a mouth guard fit exactly what is given to us. If you took a scan of a patient who's got an aligner, but the aligner was not in the mouth, we will make the mouth guard fit those teeth. And actually it'll be doing the same as the aligner almost for that hour they're wearing it. So I would have thought, but I'm not necessarily the absolute expert in this, but the preference would be to take the aligner out, make a mouth guard. They switch the aligner to the mouth guard when they're playing. But obviously what's going to happen is over the space of weeks, their mouth is going to change shape. So for me, the best solution is to actually then modify the mouth guard as the weeks go on. So if I were making a mouth guard, if I was still in practice nowadays, and as I said, I haven't been in practice for a while, so things may have changed without me realizing it, I'd be inclined to take the aligner out, take an impression or a scan at that particular point, make the mouth guard. We know it'll fit at day one because that's the day that the scan was taken. But then by using boiling water with the mouth guards that we make, one can actually adjust them. And I'd be saying to the patient, wear the mouth guard until it becomes a little bit tight. It will become tight as your teeth move. At the point in time it feels a little bit tight, take some boiling water, pour some boiling water into the occlusal side, into the fitting side of the mouth guard for 5-10 seconds. It'll just soften the mouth guard slightly. Pop it back in your mouth, have a drink of cold water, and the mouth guard will reset to the new position of the teeth. Now, back in the day when one of my kids had major orthodontics, he went through an entire year. He had a couple of unexposed threes in his palate, which had to be brought down. I made him one mouth guard, and it lasted the entire year throughout everything. And every 2-3 weeks, we would just go through a hot water exercise to slightly modify the mouth guard to adapt to the new shape of the teeth.
I understand that with respect to fixed braces, but the issue with the liners is that patients need to be wearing them for a minimum 22 hours a day. So if they've taken them out when they're training during the week and then they're playing, it's a compound effect of not wearing the aligner because teeth will relapse. So I totally get your point with that. So that's the issue that I have, is saying to athletes, if I give them the option to say, actually, you can take your aligner out and you can wear your mouth guard, everything's just going to relapse. They're not going to wear it as often. So I say, look, even if you're playing, you're going to be wearing it because otherwise teeth won't move. Because that's where compliance comes into aligners rather than fixed braces. With fixed braces, if they're on, they're doing their job. John, you do quite a lot of aligner work. Is that something that you would do as well?
Yeah. I tend to get them to take them out like the way Anthony is sort of suggesting, but I might have to rethink. I did have one of the South African rugby players in. They were over playing Leinster and they needed rescanned for an AMG. One of them was wearing an aligner and he wanted scanned with the aligner in. And I was like, well, I usually scan with it out, but as you said, Anthony, you just do what you're told sometimes. So you wanted scanned with it in, so I just scanned it with it in and sent the scan on. So that's actually an interesting question, and it'll be good to hear other people's opinions on it. I can understand where you're coming from, Umar, where you're at risk of not having that aligner in for long enough to get the movement, but I wonder, can that be counteracted other ways? How do you find, from a comfort perspective, the players wearing it with the liner in and the mouthguard over it? Do you have any issues that way?
No, I think they've actually been fitting really nicely. And as the time goes on, so what we normally advocate is when Fiona and I were kind of talking about what time frame we'd be looking at, usually every kind of 10 to 12 aligners, we would probably look at making a new one. But if the mouthguard is still fitting over the top of it, then they can continue using it. For the elite athletes, it's not too much of an issue because they're not paying for new mouthguards. But for your average patient who may have to get a new mouthguard kind of every 3 months or 6 months, you have to factor that cost in as well on top of that. So I think that's certainly something for you to look at there, Anthony. I think there's definitely the amount of people that use aligners and that play sport is amazing. And I think people want to be able to get on with the aligners and get their teeth straight as quick as possible. You know, the quicker they can get stuff done, the better. And if there's a way to facilitate that, then I think that would be amazing. I've had a few of my orthodontic friends, consultant orthodontic friends, asking me that question. And it's quite funny because I do it differently to John and to what you're saying there, Anthony, too. So, it's something for us to think about, certainly.
I think over the years, I've come to appreciate that you get 5 dentists in a room, you'll get 6 opinions. And our job, and it's important, is to satisfy all 5 dentists, and all of them are going to come with a different thing. So we will make a mouth guard to fit whatever we're given, and we will do a good job at that. It's not my job to preach about what I think the best way is. As I said, I am a dentist, but I haven't been in practice for many years, more out of touch than I might like to be. So if we get a scan in and there's an aligner there, we'll make the mouth guard go over it. And if we get another scan from John and the aligner's been removed, we'll make the mouth guard fit that. The boiling water thing will work in both cases. So if you're going to go from one aligner to another over a period of months, if the mouth guard can still be adjusted the same way, a bit of boiling water, put it in over the new aligner, it will adjust shape very quickly, and you can keep that mouth guard going quite comfortably.
The only thing then is maybe that you wouldn't be able to necessarily do that with the instrumented mouth guards, because I know one of the Irish men's players, not before last year's Six Nations when the first came in, he was thinking about getting Invisalign and he's put it off, and he's still put it off because of the instrumented mouth guards and the fact that he has to wear it and he doesn't want that impact. And I suppose that's adding another obstacle and challenge as well.
I'm familiar with quite a few players who've got aligners professionally, and the ones that I know seem to prefer to remove their aligners and wear the mouth guard instead of the aligner. So there's always something in their mouth. It's either an aligner or a mouth guard. So that seems to me more popular, but I can't be certain because I don't look at every single case that comes through here.
Yeah. So I think that's absolutely fantastic. You've given us a great insight to OPRO, and so you're almost 30 years. It'll be 30 years. If it's 1996, it'll be 30 years next year, 26. Are there any big plans for a big 30th celebration? And also, looking back over the last 30 years, is there any sort of moments or experiences that really sit out that you're particularly fond of?
Oh, goodness. Celebrations, I'm not a great one for celebrations. I think 30 will be in 2027. So I'll try and get to 40 or 50 years first. Then I might celebrate. I'm now in my late 60s. I've got 3 children, all in their sort of 30s and 40s. They all work in the company. The 2 boys now have taken over as joint managing directors, and frankly, I've got a better commercial brain than I ever had. So things are going really well. And I spend my day in the lab, really, just fiddling and just trying to marginal gains, just trying to improve this, that, and the other. So, but as for favourite stories, goodness, I've always been a sports fan. Rugby actually has always been my passion. So, for example, and I'll show my age here. Back in 2003, when I went to make the mouth guards for the England team when they went out to Australia for the World Cup, which they won, and we went to fit the mouth guards on the night before they flew out to Australia, and that was at Twickenham, and we sat in the stands watching the training match the last evening, and then they took me into the dressing room and all signed one of their shirts and what have you. Yeah, as a rugby fan, that was fantastic. Or when you get the All Blacks coming over from New Zealand and you get a message saying that I won't drop specific names, but one very famous fly half, his mouth guard, he forgot it back in New Zealand. Could I pop up to London and make a new one for him? Yeah, it's great. You walk in and chat with the All Blacks. It's been, you know what it's like, guys. It's fabulous being in the sports world. It's fabulous meeting some really brilliant people. So it's been a great journey.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And have you anything coming up? Is there any sporting events or anything that you're really looking forward to coming up?
Nothing. Everything, nothing specific, just everything. There's just so much to look forward to. I just enjoy being involved in the sports world, and through what we do, I'm involved with the UFC over in Las Vegas. We're involved with rugby. We're involved with so many different sports. It's been a fun world, having left being a dentist, so to speak, a practicing dentist, to being a dentist in the world of sport. It's been a fantastic career.
That's the way that we look at it now as well, in terms of kind of take things forward. You took let's call it a risk back then to see, okay, what's going to happen? I'll go down this path, because you didn't really know at that time, how far you could have gone. And look at you now, you're a very, very modest man in what you're saying, what you've achieved. But, it's incredible to sit and think that you just took a punt, pardon the pun. You took a punt on where that was going to lead to. And John and I wanted to set this podcast up just for that, because we wanted to help inspire other people to, if they've got something they think can help athletes and the marginal gains and the 1%ers, whatever that might be. And if they can hear it off somebody like yourself, then it'll give them a little bit of a boost to say, look, I can do something out with clinical dentistry, and who knows where that might lead to.
Absolutely. I remember back in about 96, 97, I was talking to someone about, life was a treadmill, in dental practice all day long, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, how do you get off a treadmill? He said, it's very easy. He said, you press the stop button and get off. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting thought. So I pressed the stop button, got off, and started something new. And yes, I had a safety net, which is that if it didn't work, I'd go back to doing what I'd done before. But I just gave it a go, and I've been very fortunate. The stars have aligned.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. And I think for most dentists will have heard of the name OPRO, and being able to listen to your story, they'll get a really good understanding, because it's easy to look from afar and see, oh, it's just a company that makes mouthguards, but to show how you have progressed, particularly the amount of effort, as I spoke about, the detail that you put into it as well. And you talk about, you've mentioned robots a number of times, and there's not many other mouthguard manufacturers or dental labs that can talk about how they're using robots to make a mouthguard. So it's an absolutely fantastic lesson. And thanks so much for coming on and giving us an insight into yourself and into the world of OPRO.
It's been a great pleasure and great fun.
Just one more thing before you go is, if there's someone listening out there who would like to team up with OPRO, so somebody in South America, somebody in Africa wanted to team up with OPRO to provide mouthguards for their team or for their international team, how can they go about doing that?
Just simply contact us, look at our website, email address. If they contact oprogroup.com, we will work with anybody from anywhere.
That's magnificent. Thank you so much, Anthony. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to your journey.
Lovely stuff.
Yeah, thanks so much.
We are delighted to have Ionate as a sponsor for the Sports Dentistry Podcast. Are you looking for a water bottle that's built to keep up with your active lifestyle? Look no further than Ionate, the totally leak-proof water bottles with triple lock technology to prevent spills no matter where you're headed. With a simple one-touch opening mechanism, you can sip on the go without hassle. Plus, Ionate's sleek, modern designs are not only functional but can be personalized just for you. Made from high-quality steel, these bottles are easy to clean, and best of all, they're sustainable. From 320 mils to 1200 mils, Ionate has the perfect size for you, whether you're just out for a jog or going on a long hike. And it doesn't stop at water bottles. Ionate also has travel mugs and flasks to keep your drinks just right wherever you are. Ionate is the official water bottle supplier to the British and Irish Lions on their tour to Australia this summer, and are the official water bottle supplier to the NFL, so you know you're getting the best. I have been using their bottles for a long time now and cannot recommend them highly enough. So head over to www.ionate.co.uk to get your hands on the best bottles in the business, bar none. Now back to the pod.
It's really interesting conversation we had there with Anthony. I've known OPRO, I've been around for so long. It's almost 30 years, and it was probably on my radar for about 20 years. And I've never put together that OPRO actually stands for occlusal protector. Did you?
No, I had absolutely no idea, and it was great that you asked that question, because I'm sure a lot of the listeners are probably asking, what does that actually stand for? But OPRO is such a name brand that dentists, not just sports dentists, but many dentists, not just in the UK, but worldwide, will have seen OPRO on television because of the athletes that are using it. And you have to take your hats off to Anthony. I mean, what he has done is simply incredible, to take an idea and out-the-box thinking, to take it to where it is now, and what he is doing with instrumented mouthguards with the elite athletes is mind-blowing. And he comes across so well in terms of he's very feet on the ground, very down to earth. He's like, we just want to keep striving to do what's the next best thing. So in his heart, deep down, obviously it's about protection. Yes, it's about protecting the teeth, protecting the gums. Yes, but also integrating Prevent and their instrumented mouthguards into it when it comes to acceleration, deceleration, potential concussion. It's the fact that he is so forward thinking is great to see.
Yeah, it's great. And as I said, I had the pleasure of being in OPRO about a decade ago. And I'm sure it's a lot more advanced now, but you don't really appreciate just how much detail that goes in. I definitely didn't until I actually had a chance to go in and have a look around, like the amount of detail that goes in. And as I mentioned, like it always struck me now, and our listeners, you can even try this for yourselves the next time you're in a sports shop and you go to the mouthguard section, have a look at all the different boil and bites and have a look at just the shape of them and what shape represents more what the shape of a mouth would look like. And definitely from the information and data that they have took in from all the mouthguards over the years, they have made these innovations where they've created their own custom fitted trays to give better impressions, where when they went into the boil and bite market, they were able to create a shape of a boil and bite mouthguard that represented what the shape of an arch would be like. And then to even take that a little bit further, where they've been able to develop an average arch shape and size and use that to create what they call the perfect fit sort of boil and bite. It's really a lot of innovation. And you even hear what he spoke about, how he's automated the thermoforming machines. There really is a lot of advancements there, and how they're using lasers and stuff for cutting. Like everything is looked at and analysed and done the best. And it's not just a normal mouthguard lab where you send your impression in and the normal process. It really is more like a proper manufacturing plant that OPRO have, and it's fantastic. And just the ability then to be able to help World Rugby roll that out internationally and be able to get that demand and be able to supply that demand on a world level was just absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, I've got a question for you, John. So do you think we're past the point of calling it a boiling bite? We call it a boiling bite. He was basically saying that it's not called boiling bite because the amount of effort that they've put in terms of talking about the shapes of the maxilla and what they need to do differently to make them, as inverted commas, custom made as possible. So we need to give credit. Definitely from hearing him talk, I think we have to give him massive credit, because I, for one, have grown up knowing that boil and bite is not very good. You shouldn't be using it. You should be using, inverted commas, custom made. Now, look, not everybody has the ability or financial ability to be able to afford custom made mouthguards. This is the next best thing. So the fact that he's actually now described what they have done in terms of the processes gone behind it, of being able to create mouthguards from the variety of previous impressions and scans that they've had to make it as close as possible to giving the general public something that can protect their teeth. Surely we have to give him credit for that.
Yeah, but I don't think we can change the name boil and bite, because you still have to heat it up and put it into your mouth now and possibly bite into it. So I think I personally do have a little bit of a gripe about how we call what we call mouthguards, and I see it a lot in research and stuff where they talk about the different types of mouthguards and the 3 different types of being stock, boil and bite, and custom fitted. And I think that's what needs to change, is how we define mouthguard types, because even just them 3 just are really just looking at the manufacturing process, whether they're like a stock mouthguard or a boil and bite mouthguard or the custom fitted from an impression. That there's just so many other factors to a mouthguard that every mouthguard doesn't fit into them 3 types. And this is something I've been thinking about for a while, that we really need to look at redefining the definition of types of mouthguards, because internationally, and you see it in every research paper when they talk about types, they just describe stock, boil and bite, and custom fitted, and there's a lot more to the mouthguard than that, and that's probably where my gripe would be. But I don't think we can say a boil and bite isn't a boil and bite if that's what you're doing with it. But I think it's only part of the type of mouthguard. It shouldn't be the defining headline, this mouthguard is a boil and bite, because there's more factors to it. It's only one part. That's only the fitting process of that mouthguard, and not all boil and bites are the same. So it's probably more that we need to look at how we define mouthguard types more than anything else, would be my thought on that.
I agree with you. So that basically means we should open up to the floor, and so we need to get suggestions then in terms of what people would then perceive mouthguards to be. So if we are going to change the names of it, then we need to know what dental practitioners and also the general public would need it to be named. Because if we are going to change what it's going to be like, then we need to know what the vast majority of people want it to be. So there's no point in just having people who are going to be sitting at a computer or sitting at a desk saying we're going to call this X, Y, and Z. We need to have people on the inverted commas front line who are going to be dealing with it day in, day out to be able to explain what they are. So I think we need to have ideas. So hopefully we can open up to the floor. So if you're listening and you have ideas of what we need to maybe look at calling mouthguards going forward, custom-made mouthguards made by a dental practitioner is okay, pretty much set in stone. But things like boil and bite or custom insert fit or whatever it is it needs to be, we need to potentially look at names that are going to be universal. So wherever you go in the world, whatever sport you're playing, whoever you're speaking to clinician-wise, they know that you have the name of what it is that you're using or what it's going to be. I think that's really important, and I think it needs to be spoken about rather than having people just making decision of this is what it needs to be. So I think we need to open up to the floor and have all these amazing people who are listening to give us ideas, and then we'll be able to then maybe potentially put it to a vote in podcasts to come, or even at the EA4SD or at the American Academy of Sports Dentistry. I mean, we can kind of figure out, okay, we're thinking about maybe potentially changing how the names are going to be branded. What do people think?
Yeah, definitely, because currently the types is just too broad. Like, so you've got custom fitted, so you got to have a vacuum former forming a 4 mil over a model. That's completely different than a multi-layered laminated thermoformed mouthguard that's done under a pressurized thermoformer. That's completely different, but it's all put underneath the custom fitted one. Instrumented mouthguards, where do they go? Because they're designed to be different from protective mouthguards, but yet if we were looking at them at a mouthguard type, they would either go under boil and bite or custom fitted. So it may be a little bit difficult to get a very simple new type of way of calling mouthguards compared to just the normal stock boil and bite and custom fitted. But I think that's a little bit outdated of a way to look at the mouthguards. Maybe looking at redesigning that. I'm sure instrumented mouthguards would be a top, like a type under themselves, but underneath that they could either be custom fitted or there was people trying to do boil and bite versions of them. So, yeah, there needs to be a little bit of thought, but I do feel the common way of saying that there's 3 mouthguard types: stock, boil and bite, custom fitted, is a little bit outdated with how everything's developed and with there's so much variance now and from mouthguard to mouthguard.
Yeah, but things change, don't they? Things change as time goes on. Nothing stays still or stays static. So we have to change with the times. So, but there's no harm in having the conversation. I think that's the most important thing, is that we need to have the conversation about it. And we need to have people like Anthony involved and other clinicians or other technicians who are doing this day in, day out, because we have to evolve and we have to develop as well. We can't just stay still because and then everything else just carries on, but we can't still.
Yeah, it'll be good. It'll be good to have the conversation. Well, I think that's a wrap now for this podcast. More, I'm going to let you get back to the pool.
Yeah, that's fine, mate. Yeah, no, thanks very much for taking the time to speak to me, and hopefully,
I hope you're using your ion bottle to keep your drink nice and cool at the pool, are you?
Absolutely. You know, and you must have received yours by now. Tell the listeners, tell the listeners how good it is.
It's great. It's great. Keeps things hot, keeps things warm, keeps things cold, whatever you want to have in it. It's actually a really good size. It's 750 ml, which is probably holds a lot more than a lot of other bottles, competition bottles. So the amount of volume it holds is pretty good, which is one of my takeaways from receiving it.
Fantastic. Maybe we'll send that feedback to the Ionate team. I'm sure they'll be delighted with that. But yeah, no, thanks very much for jumping on, John. I know you're busy in the clinic just now, and I'm busy at the pool taking some sunshine in. And hopefully the listeners will have a really, really good insight into what Anthony's had to say. And if you've got any comments, please send either John and I a direct message or leave comments on the Spotify or the Apple or the Elite2 page. And we'll definitely take that on board until our next guest.
Great. And any advice about our live podcast as well will be great as well. So until the next time, Umar, enjoy the sun.
I will do, my friend. Enjoy the clinic.
Cheers. See you again.
Cheers, buddy.